What if the woman you love is hiding a deadly secret? A billionaire falls head over heels for his maid, showering her with wealth and affection. But he has no idea she's only there for revenge. His powerful mother ruined her life, and now she's about to take his. But love and betrayal are a dangerous mix. Will she go through with her plan, or will her heart get in the way? Stay tuned for a shocking story of love, vengeance, and justice. Femi Adeyemi had everything: a billion-dollar empire, luxury cars, and a mansion that could house a small village. But none of it compared to the one thing he desired most: Said, the housemaid. From the moment she stepped into his mother's household, Femi had been drawn to her. She was different, soft-spoken yet strong, with eyes that held secrets he couldn't decipher. Despite the vast difference in their social statuses, he found himself falling for her, and to his surprise, she reciprocated his feelings. Said, however, knew the dangers of their love. Madame Adeyemi, Femi's overbearing mother, would never approve. She was a woman who controlled everything, ensuring that her son only associated with women of their class. Said had heard stories of the older woman's ruthlessness, how she had crushed those who dared to defy her. Still, she couldn't help but be swept away by Femi's persistence. He promised to protect her, to stand against his mother if necessary. And for a while, it seemed like their love could survive anything. But love, as Sade knew too well, was never simple. Not when it involved power, money, and an unforgiving mother who had destroyed her life once before. Madame Adeyemi had always believed that her son would marry a woman of wealth and class, someone who would uphold the family's name and legacy. When she discovered that he had fallen for the maid, she was livid. She confronted him in his office, her voice cold and sharp as she warned him of the disgrace he was bringing to the family. "You think you love a maid? A common girl who scrubs our floors?" she hissed. "Do you have any idea what this would do to our reputation?" But Femi stood firm. "I love her, mother. Nothing you say will change that." Madame Adeyemi was not a woman who accepted defeat. She vowed to end this foolishness before it could ruin everything she had built. What Femi didn't know was that Said's past was deeply intertwined with his mother's cruelty. And when the truth came out, love would no longer be enough to save them both. Said had never forgotten the day her world crumbled. Years ago, she had watched helplessly as her only brother, Gundli, was thrown into the streets like garbage. His only crime? Stealing a loaf of bread from Madame Adeyemi's kitchen to feed his love. That day, Madame Adeyemi had made an example of him, ensuring he was beaten and left to rot in the slums. Said never saw him again. That moment had shaped her, hardening her heart against the wealthy and their cruelty. When she entered the Adeyemi household years later as a maid, she had only one goal: to make them pay. But then Femi had shattered her plans with his kindness. He had seen her, truly seen her, in a way no one else had. Against her will, she had fallen in love. And now, as Madame Adeyemi began to move against her, Said knew she had to make a choice. Abandon the love she had found, or fulfill the vengeance she had sworn long ago. Femi, oblivious to the storm brewing, continued to fight for their love. But Said was no longer sure if love was enough. Not when the ghosts of her past whispered of revenge, urging her to finish what she had started. Madame Adeyemi wasted no time in executing her plan. She called in favors, ensuring that Sade's employment in the house would soon become unbearable. Tasks were doubled, insults became more frequent, and the other staff members, fearing for their jobs, dared not show Said any kindness. Each day became a test of endurance, but Sade refused to break. She had suffered worse before and survived. Meanwhile, Femi fought against his mother's influence, trying to shield Said from her wrath. He sought to make their relationship public, believing that by owning his love for her, he could protect her. He took Said out on dates, bought her expensive gifts, and even whispered promises of marriage. But Said knew better than to believe in fairy tales. Every gesture of love only fanned the flames of Madame Adeyemi's fury. And in the shadows, Said's heart battled with itself, torn between the man she loved and the revenge she had vowed to see through. Said could see the cracks forming in Femi's world. His relationship with his mother had become more strained than ever, and he was beginning to lose focus at work. Rumors circulated about board members questioning his judgment, blaming his newfound distraction. But Femi didn't care. He only wanted to be with her. "You're all that matters to me, Said," he whispered one evening as they sat beneath the stars in his private garden. "I don't care what anyone says. I'll fight for us." Said forced a smile, but her heart was heavy. The more Femi fought, the more dangerous things became. Madame Adeyemi would not sit idly by, while her son threw away everything for a maid. And deep inside, Said knew that love could never erase the past. That night she dreamed of Kunle, his thin face, his pleading eyes. She woke up in a cold sweat, his voice echoing in her mind, "Do not forget, Sade, do not forgive." And in that moment she knew Femi had to pay the price. No matter how much she loved him, justice had to be served. Femi's world was beginning to crumble. His mother's influence in the business world was strong, and the pressure she exerted was beginning to weigh heavily on him. Investors grew wary, and the media began whispering about a scandal brewing within the Adeyemi empire. His love for Sade had become more than just a personal matter. It was now a threat to everything he had built. Said, on the other hand, could see the toll it was taking on him. For the first time, doubt flickered in her heart. Was she truly willing to destroy the man who had shown her love? But then the image of Kunle, broken and abandoned, reminded her of why she had come this far. She couldn't let herself waver. One evening, Femi stormed into the house, frustration clear in his expression. "My mother is trying to break us apart," he said, running a hand through his hair. "She's pulling strings behind the scenes, making my life hell." Said hesitated, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her dress. "Maybe we should take a step back. For me, I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." Femi took her hands in his grip firm. "I'd rather lose everything than lose you." She forced a smile, but deep inside, she knew his words would not hold forever. Soon, he would have to choose between love and survival. And when that time came, she would ensure that the choice would cost him dearly. Madame Adeyemi was not a woman who tolerated defiance. When she saw that Femi was refusing to let go of Said, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She arranged for a private investigator to dig into Said's past, determined to find anything that could ruin her reputation. It wasn't long before the investigator returned with her discovery: Said's connection to Kunle, the boy she had condemned to the streets. Madame Adeyemi smirked as she read the report. This was her weapon. That evening she called Said to her private sitting room. The air was thick with tension as Madame Adeyemi crossed her legs gracefully, her cold eyes locking onto the maid. "You thought you could deceive my son forever?" she asked, her voice laced with mockery. "I know who you are, Said. I know about your brother." Said's breath hitched. She had spent years burying her past, yet here it was, unearthed and used against her. "You came here for revenge, didn't you?" Madame Adeyemi continued, her lips curling. "But let me tell you something. No one wins against me." Said clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. This woman had ruined her life once. She wouldn't let it happen again. "You underestimate me, madam," Said said, her voice steady. "You always have." Madame Adeyemi's eyes narrowed. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed her face. Said was no longer just a helpless maid. She was something far more dangerous, and the battle had only just begun. Said left Madame Adeyemi's sitting room with her heart pounding. The woman knew everything, and now the game had changed. She needed to act fast. If Madame Adeyemi exposed her past to Femi, everything she had worked for would be ruined. She could not afford to let that happen. The next morning, Femi noticed Said's distant demeanor. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. Said forced a smile. "Nothing, just tired." But Femi wasn't convinced. He pulled her aside later that day. "Is my mother threatening you?" he pressed. Said hesitated before shaking her head. "I can handle her."
Femi exhaled sharply.
"I won't let her ruin what we have. Let's leave this place, Said. Let's run away." Said's breath caught. Run away! That wasn't part of her plan. She needed to stay close to the Adeyemi family to exact her revenge. But Femi's desperation was real, and it was clear that his love for her was stronger than ever. The thought of leaving everything behind, of truly choosing love over revenge, flashed in her mind. But then she remembered Kunle. The weight of her past crashed down on her, and she realized that she couldn't let go of her mission. Madame Adeyemi would pay, and if Femi stood in her way, he would pay too. For the first time, Said questioned how far she was willing to go. Madame Adeyemi was growing impatient. She had expected Said to crumble under the weight of her revelations. But instead, the maid was still standing. Worse, Femi was becoming more rebellious, pulling further away from her grasp. It was time for her to escalate things. She called for Femi that evening. "Son, I will not stand by and watch you throw your life away for a girl who has been lying to you." Femi folded his arms. "What are you talking about?" Madame Adeyemi smiled coldly. "Ask her about Kunle." Femi frowned. "Who is Kunle?" "You'll have to ask Said," his mother said, leaning back smugly. "She's been keeping secrets from you, my dear son. She's not who you think she is." Femi stormed out of the room and went straight to Said's quarters. When he found her, his voice was strained. "Who is Kunle?" Said stiffened, her mind racing. She had been careful, but Madame Adeyemi had forced her hand. She took a deep breath. "He was my brother." Femi searched her eyes. "And what does my mother have to do with him?" Said knew she had two choices: lie and protect what little she had left with Femi, or tell the truth and risk losing him forever. But as she looked into his eyes, she realized something terrifying. The time for deception was over. Said inhaled sharply, her mind racing. If she told him the truth, Femi might never forgive her. But if she lied, she risked losing control of the situation. The weight of her decision pressed against her chest. "He was my brother," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother, she ruined his life." Femi frowned. "How?" Said swallowed hard, fighting the tears threatening to spill. "She got him fired, Femi. She blacklisted him. Made sure he couldn't get a job anywhere. He lost everything, and he never recovered." Femi's expression darkened. "Why would she do that?" Said met his gaze, her voice steady. "Because he loved the wrong person. Just like you." Realization dawned on Femi's face. "Are you saying my mother did to him what she's trying to do to you?" Said nodded, and for the first time, she saw something shift in Femi's eyes. Doubt. Madame Adeyemi had always been a force to reckon with, but now Femi was beginning to see her for what she truly was, a destroyer of lives. Femi sat in silence, his mind racing as he processed Said's words. The woman who had raised him, the woman he had always seen as his protector, had destroyed someone's life out of sheer malice. He struggled to reconcile the image of his mother with the ruthless woman Saad was describing. But deep down, he knew the truth. His mother was capable of anything. Said watched Femi closely, searching for a sign of where his loyalty lay. Would he stand by her, or would he cling to his mother despite everything? The hesitation in his eyes made her stomach twist. She needed him to choose her, not just for love, but for justice, for Kunle. Finally, Femi exhaled shakily. "I need to hear it from her," he said, his voice hoarse. "I need to confront my mother." Said's heart sank. She knew what that meant. Madame Adeyemi would spin the story, twist the truth until Femi doubted everything. If he went to her, there was a chance she would lose him forever. "Femi, please," she said, gripping his hands. "She's manipulative. She'll lie to you. I just need to know," he whispered. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Said alone with the sinking realization that she was beginning to lose control of everything. Femi stormed into his mother's study, his jaw clenched. Madame Adeyemi, seated elegantly behind her mahogany desk, raised an eyebrow at his sudden intrusion. "You look troubled, my son," she said smoothly, sipping from a crystal glass. "Has that girl been filling your head with nonsense?" Femi ignored the jab. "Tell me about Kunle." The shift in Madame Adeyemi's expression was almost imperceptible. But Femi caught it, a flicker of irritation, quickly masked by amusement. "Oh, so she told you about him." She set down her glass, tilting her head. "What exactly did she say?" "She said you ruined his life, that you had him fired and blacklisted, that he lost everything because of you." Madame Adeyemi sighed dramatically. "That girl is more cunning than I thought." She stood walking around her desk slowly. Kunle was reckless, Femi. He was involved with the wrong people, making foolish decisions. I simply ensured that he didn't drag our family name into the mud. That's not true, Femi countered, his voice rising. You destroyed him because he was in love with someone you didn't approve of. Madame Adeyemi's smile vanished. I did what was necessary. Femi stared at her, the last vestiges of denial crumbling away. His mother wasn't denying it. She wasn't even ashamed. For the first time in his life, Femi saw her for who she truly was. A woman who would destroy anyone who stood in her way, including him. Zaid paced the length of her small room, her mind racing. If Femi believed his mother's lies, all her efforts would have been for nothing. She needed to act. When Femi returned that evening, his face was unreadable. Zaid's heart pounded. What did she say? He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his hands over his face. She didn't deny it, Zaid. A wave of relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. So what now? She asked cautiously. Femi lifted his gaze to hers, pain evident in his eyes. I don't know. She's my mother. Zaid's stomach twisted. This was the moment of truth. If he chose his mother, her plan would crumble. If he chose her, there was still hope. Femi, she whispered, moving closer. She's never going to stop. She will do to me what she did to Kunle. He clenched his jaw, looking away. I just need time to think. But time was the one thing Zaid didn't have. The following days were tense. Madame Adeyemi could sense that Femi was slipping away, and she wasn't about to let that happen. She arranged a meeting with a prominent family, introducing Femi to a wealthy businessman's daughter, subtly reinforcing the idea that he needed to marry within his class. Zaid found out about the meeting through one of the other maids, and her blood ran cold. Madame Adeyemi was making her move, forcing Femi into a corner. That evening, when Femi returned home, Sade was waiting. Are you really considering her offer? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Femi sighed. I don't know what to do, Zaid. My entire world is crumbling. Then let it crumble, she said fiercely. Start over with me. Femi searched her face, his emotions warring inside him. He loved her, but was he ready to lose everything? Madame Adeyemi wasn't going to wait for him to decide. And neither was Zaid. One of them had to make the next move. Madame Adeyemi sat in her lavish living room, sipping a glass of red wine when Zaid walked in unannounced. The older woman looked up, mildly amused. You have some nerve coming to me like this. Zaid met her gaze without fear. I want to make a deal. Madame Adeyemi leaned back, intrigued. Oh, and what could you possibly offer me? Zaid's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. I'll leave Femi. I'll walk away forever. But in return, you leave me alone. No threats, no interference. I disappear and you get what you want. Madame Adeyemi studied her, tapping a manicured nail against her glass. You're willing to give him up? Zaid swallowed. If it means protecting myself, yes. The older woman smirked. You're a smart girl, Zaid, but how do I know you'll keep your word? Zaid took a shaky breath. Because if I stay, I'll destroy him. And I don't want that. Madame Adeyemi considered her words before nodding slowly. Fine, you leave tonight. And if you ever come back, I won't, Zaid cut in. But as she walked away, her heart shattered. Because she wasn't giving up. She was preparing for the final move. One that would change everything forever. Femi stared at the phone screen, his breath shallow. The weight of the truth pressed against his chest. The woman who raised him, the one who gave him everything, had built her empire on the ruins of other people's lives. And sad, the woman he loved had risked everything to bring him the truth. What do you want me to do with this, Zaid? He asked, his voice strained. Do what's right, she replied. For once in your life, stop protecting her. Femi clenched his fists. She's my mother. And Kunle was my brother, Zaid shot back, her eyes blazing. And she destroyed him without a second thought. The room fell into a heavy silence. Femi knew there was no turning back. The next morning, Femi confronted his mother. He stormed into her study, slamming his phone onto the desk. What is this? He demanded. Madame Adeyemi picked up the device, pressing play. As her own voice filled the room, cold and calculated, she didn't flinch. Instead, she sighed and set the phone down. I see Zaid has been busy, she said, unbothered. That's all you have to say? Femi's voice shook with rage. His mother gave him a pitying look. Do you think this will change anything? I built this family, Femi. Do you think one recording will bring it down? Femi's stomach twisted. She had no remorse, no guilt. And suddenly, he saw her for what she truly was, a tyrant who would never stop. Said knew Femi would struggle with the truth, but she had no time to wait for him to find his courage. If he wouldn't act, she would. She met with a journalist at a discreet location, handing over the recording. "Expose her," she said. "Tell the world what she's done." The journalist hesitated. This could ruin her. "That's the point." Said walked away, knowing there was no going back. Madame Adeyemi had taken everything from her. Now she would lose everything in return. By the next morning, the news had exploded. Headlines splashed across every media outlet. Business tycoon Madame Adeyemi exposed in shocking scandal. The entire city was buzzing. Investors pulled out of her business. Her reputation crumbled, and high society turned against her. Inside the mansion, Madame Adeyemi sat in her study, the phone ringing off the hook. Calls from business partners, threats, condemnations. She had never felt fear before, but now she did. And it was all because of that girl. Madame Adeyemi wasn't one to go down without a fight. She summoned Said to the mansion, her tone eerily calm. "You've made a grave mistake," she said, pouring herself a drink. Said didn't flinch. "The only mistake was letting you get away with it for so long." Madame Adeyemi took a slow sip, her gaze sharp. "You think you've won?" Said stepped forward. "I know I have." Madame Adeyemi let out a soft chuckle. "We'll see about that." Said knew she wasn't safe, not yet. That night, Madame Adeyemi made a call. "Handle it," she whispered to an unknown person. Sadeh had made her move, but Madame Adeyemi wasn't done playing the game. A shadow lurked outside Said's apartment. The fight wasn't over. Said barely had time to react when the door burst open. Two masked men stormed in. She fought, clawed, kicked, but they were stronger. They dragged her into a car, the city lights blurring past as she struggled. Panic gripped her. This was Madame Adeyemi's doing. But she wouldn't go down without a fight. Femi had been suspicious. His mother's calm demeanor, her cryptic words. When Saad stopped answering her phone, he knew something was wrong. Using his contacts, he tracked her location and stormed, in just as the men were preparing to move her again. "Said!" he shouted, tackling one of them. A brutal fight ensued, and in the chaos Said broke free, grabbing a weapon and knocking one of the men unconscious. They ran. Madame Adeyemi had finally crossed the line. The police stormed the Adeyemi estate the next morning. Madame Adeyemi, caught off guard, was arrested on multiple charges: conspiracy, corruption, attempted abduction. The once untouchable queen of high society was dragged away in handcuffs, her empire in ruins. And Said watched it all happen. With Madame Adeyemi gone, Femi was free. But so was Said. Standing at the edge of the city, Femi reached for her hand. "Stay with me." Said smiled sadly. "I got my revenge, Femi, but I need to find myself again." He nodded, understanding. He had lost a mother but gained clarity, and she had won her battle but still had a journey ahead. As she walked away, he whispered, "I'll wait for you." And for the first time, they both knew what true freedom felt like. What a shocking turn of events. This story proves that love and revenge can be a dangerous combination. If you enjoyed this thrilling tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating African folktale-inspired stories. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think revenge is ever justified, or did the maid take things too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss. See you in the next video. Love you all.